right. Well, Trish, welcome to Drunk Comics.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Cheers, air cheers,
Uh,
virtual cheers. So, where are you from?
well, that's kind of a trick question because all over, but currently I'm in Savannah, Georgia.
Very nice.
Uh,
And how did you get into comics and superheroes?
okay, comics. It started when I was little, and we were going on 2-day trips to see relatives. And on our way out of town, my parents would stop at a 7-Eleven and they would get us a Slurpee, and then we were allowed to pick out like 2 or 3 comics to take with us in the car. I did not start with superheroes. I actually used to pick up horror comics.
Oh,
I
nice.
had some weird Dracula stuff and some. Uh, they weren't like actual brand name. They weren't like like House of Horror or anything like that. But it was all horror comics. And then one time when I had those, and we went to my great aunt Beth's, she had a box full of old Marvel westerns.
Oh, fun.
So yeah, I mean, I had no idea. And it's funny now because a lot of people didn't read a lot of those that I know. So I was reading like Kid Colt, The Two Gun Kid, Rawhide Kid, um, Ghost Rider, back when he was Ghost Rider, before he was Phantom Rider. And then I ended up getting into ElfQuest because that was what was at the video store. In the little tiny town that I lived in, the only comic you could buy was ElfQuest, which was very weird looking back on it. And then I had a friend who used to give me a ride to school, and he had a bunch of X-Men comics, and then it was all downhill from there on the superheroes.
So he was very cool.
Yes, he was. I mean, I had all these weird, randomly collected from everywhere, no one topic stuff, but he had like they were all X-Men all the time. I think that was in the Storm had a Mohawk period, so it was a very interesting period to get to know the X-Men.
It's a very brief period that she had a mohawk too.
Yeah, I just remember those. That was the she had a Mohawk, and I think it was when stuff was going down in Japan because there was a lot of like Silver Samurai and stuff like that. I don't remember the specific stories at that time because they weren't my comics. I only would get to read them while we were waiting. But
That's fair. Interesting, though.
we decided that was the way to go with superheroes.
That's a good place to start. And what are you here to talk about today?
I am here to talk about Jack Knight Starman. So,
who needs more love?
He does. He does. He needs a lot more love. I think people forget about him all the time, although you can kind of see his influence in things. The staff that Courtney has now
Yes.
came from his design. I don't even know that many people really talk about Ted Knight, his dad, but that's because that's Silver Age.
Yeah.
And for a very, very brief, like 2-day period, his brother David was the Starman. But there was the series started up with 0 Hour, so it was kind of a soft reboot, and that was what they did with Starman. It was in the very first episode issue. I'm gonna be doing a lot. In the very yeah, word switching. It's my forte, especially after a couple drinks. His brother has this great introduction on the first few pages. It's his first time out really in costume. He's standing up on top of this large building. He's got the little short cosmic rod instead of the one that Jack has later. And he steps out to fly, and somebody shoots him through the heart, and he dies.
Ooh.
So there was a lot of subverting expectations with that intro. But it ended up his little brother Jack, who was an artist, and he's a fan of older stuff. He's going to be like, he knows all of Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack, not the Brat Pack, sorry. He's very into vintage things. He had his own vintage store, and here he has to step up and become a hero. And it
Nice.
turns out there was a lot more to it. He always did admire his dad, but his big brother was always kind of the one to follow in the shoes or expected to follow in the shoes. So he kind of directed his way away from it, but he did a pretty good job. Um, it was kind of an interesting series because it had a lot of ties to things that I really liked, which was more of the Vertigo line.
Hmm.
So you had, the Floronic Man showed up. You had a lot of Solomon Grundy. You had just all sorts of ties to magic and demons and ghosts, and it was just everything that I liked. You had ties to all these other mystical things that a lot of the straight up superhero stuff just sort of forgot about or didn't do. It was an odd period in DC where Vertigo didn't really mix and mesh with it because of the editorial decisions before. Um, Trying to think. Because he had more of a liking for the past, you got to see a lot more of the Justice Society. So he had an adventure with Wesley Dodds,
Nice.
Sandman, uh, who was older than dirt at this point, but because he was still a hero underneath, they still had an adventure and he still was a hero. You did a lot, of course, with Ted Knight. Sentinel, who was the Green Lantern, showed up. You just did a lot more with a lot of the characters that were becoming more popular, but they weren't really in the mainline books. So it was kind of
Right.
nice to see. And I wasn't reading as many of the other books at the time, other than the super confusing Legion, Legion of Superheroes, which I can't remember if, and this is just where my memory is failing me. I can't remember if Zero Hour was fixing the fact that there was two legions of superheroes, like the kids and the adults, or if
Hmm.
that came out of this. I can't remember how it happened. I think it
It was
maybe came.
fixed.
I
I
think it
think
was
it was.
fixed. Yeah, I think once it got fixed, you just had one set of Legion of Superheroes afterwards. But so
But with comics, the more you try to fix things, the more you just freaking break them.
well, and that was the problem. Is I know when you did the Crisis on Infinite Earths, that actually it fixed a lot for them, but it also broke other things like the Legion of Superheroes. It was like, hey, well now you've broken it, and now you have two of them actively going on at the same time, a set of teenagers and a set of adults. Okay. So then you ended up with Legion of Superheroes and Legionnaires. And then I believe that Zero Hour was fixing that. So it gets really confusing around that time. Um, the the reason I think that Jack probably doesn't get more love is that really when they wrote it, it was kind of designed with an end in mind.
Hmm.
And that was what happened is it was a series that had a definitive ending and he stopped being a hero and he left to be with his family. So but in the meantime, you had Ghost Pirates and you had Solomon Grundy and you had a whole big adventure in outer space and you got to see all of the Starmen at one point or another. You had the very kind of obscure 70s Starman, Michael Thomas,
Hmm.
who is a blue alien from the sister planet to Shadowlass. I can't remember what the name of the planet is, but from the Legion of Superheroes. You had Will Payton show up. Of course, you had Ted, and then every year his brother David would show up in a dream as a ghost and give him guidance, and they'd have an adventure together. So it was
That's
just pretty different from a lot of the uh, comics that were going on at the time.
hmm.
Yeah. Oh. And it seemed to be a lot more grounded in reality, if that makes sense.
Aside
Um,
from the ghosts, pirates, and the
well,
outer.
yes, yeah. Aside from all the supernatural stuff, none of the relationships were simple. So you had relationships with his family. His dad was proud of him, but he'd always gone off of the hero path, and sometimes he kind of made fun of it. And let's be honest, Jack was kind of the original hipster. and made fun of people for not knowing who obscure bands or movie people were.
Oh
Um,
god, those.
so he could be a total jackass. His brother David,
Nice
he and
pun.
his brother. Hmm?
Nice pun.
Oh yeah,
Jack, total jackass.
yeah, yeah. It worked well with his name. Um, he and his brother David obviously loved each other, but they showed how they had this kind of rivalry with each other. And his brother would kind of bully him, like, oh, older brothers. I don't
Yeah.
know. I had an older brother, and I remember my parents giving him a set of boxing gloves one year for Christmas and was like, really? Do you know who he's going to use those on? Because it's
Might
not
as well
you.
be Target.
That's right. It's two sets of boxing gloves. Guess who he's going to box with? um, but it was kind of that same thing. You know, they acted like they hated each other, but then when David died, you know, you found out there was a lot more to the relationship. You had the Shade show up, who he was kind of a integral character to the entire series, where a lot of times he's portrayed as just kind of this straight up villain with
Right.
no depth. There was they gave him a lot of backstory and gave him a lot of depth. He's still not a nice person, but Opal was his city, so that meant that he was playing by different rules in their city. Versus maybe he would help Jack because he liked him. Maybe he would help the cop family that worked with the Starman named the O'Dares because he liked them. But, you know, maybe if you were somebody he didn't like or you threatened his city, he would suck you into another dimension with his shadow demons and torture you to death. You know, something.
I feel that.
He had layers. They weren't all nice layers, but he had layers. Um, you had the Mist, who was his dad's old adversary, who was in a nursing home with dementia,
Oh,
and his children were out. You know, well until his son died, but his children were out continuing his legacy the same way that Jack was continuing his dad's legacy. And there's just I don't know. It's just every relationship or every person that he met, it's like they didn't make it like two dimensional. So it made it a really nice read. You never knew, like, hey, you know, Superman is always a nice guy. You know, Batman's kind of always a jerk, but he's still kind of two dimensional. You know, I love Batman. Don't get me wrong, but outside of his relationship with Alfred or whatever his current Catwoman obsession is, do we really get to see a lot of depth in him a lot of times?
when he's written well, yes, but otherwise, no.
Yeah. Um, Same thing with a lot of other characters. You know, it's just they did a good job of bringing a lot of realism to it. I mean, yeah, Copperhead showed up, and it turned out that he liked to collect transistor radios. It was just a weird perk
Interesting.
to add on to give him depth. While he was waiting for his job to do or whatever whoever he was trying to kill, he was going to all the pawn shops looking for old transistor radios. Yeah. It just gave it a little bit of humanity to everybody. I like that.
That's always really nice to see in a story. It's way more interesting than the villain just twirling his mustache. And
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes those stories are nice too, but it's more interesting, I think.
Yeah. As long as you keep a good balance. It can be a little too easy to make your villain too sympathetic. I think is why a lot of writers stray from that. They don't want to. They're like, well, I don't want to give him too much depth because then people might like identify with him, and then they're not. They think he's more of a good guy than a bad guy. Where in real life, bad guys might have families and they might like people or whatever, but then they might also, you know, heinously murdered somebody. So they kind of kept that in mind when he was doing all the characters, which I really liked.
That's awesome. Unlike some places where they're like, well, we gave them depth and now they're likable, so now we need to keep trying to explain away and redeem them in spite of the fact that they murdered thousands of people. No, no.
Yeah.
Cool motive, still murder.
Yep. I mean, you can understand the motive and they can still be a bad guy.
Yes,
That doesn't
exactly.
mean that doesn't mean that they're redeemable or that they want to be redeemed.
That
I
too.
think that's the main thing that people have trouble remembering. It's like, yeah, the bad guy maybe doesn't want to be redeemed. When you do Magneto right, that is absolutely the case. He does have sympathetic reasons, but he's absolutely not going to stray from his path because he knows what the hell's going to happen. He's going to kill people. He
Yep.
doesn't want you to fix him.
And I love Magneto. Love Magneto. But no, you're right. He doesn't want to be redeemed. And that's the
Yep,
beauty of Magneto. He doesn't want to be redeemed.
yep. He knows his path. He's sure he's absolutely right, and he's going to stick to it. So, you know, you can do that with bad guys and have them be the same. Um, they did a lot of work with having the green attached to Starman by having Solomon Grundy in there. You also had, like I said, you had the Floronic Man show up, which was weird because he showed up with Batman, who was his jailer. He was on
Interesting.
his way from Arkham. Back astonishingly gets along really well with Silver Age heroes, and he can't stand Batman. So he's like, "You're everything I hate in a hero. You take it like so super seriously, and you just no sense of humor, and everything is just life or death with you." And it's like, well, okay, it's Batman, so yeah, kind of.
It kind of is.
But so Batman shows up with Jason Woodrue, the Floronic Man, and Sentinel, and he's getting along better with those two than with Batman. So
That's great. That's
he's just
great.
like, yeah, Batman, you're a jerk. I like you. You're old and you know the movies that I'm referencing. So
And Batman's just like, I'm Batman. Take me seriously.
yeah, he referenced a movie. I was trying to remember what it was. I can't remember what it was. And meanwhile, Batman's like, I don't watch television. I don't watch movies. I don't know
I
what you're
went to
talking
a
about.
movie once and it went badly.
Yeah. It's like, good point. But yeah, so meanwhile, Jack's like, I'm trying to make an analogy here, and you're not working with me. Sorry, Batman. Um, yeah, so they had a lot of ties in with the Green, and they did a lot of work with Solomon Grundy that I think paid off later in things like Justice League.
Mhm.
So when you had the more sympathetic kind of sweet dummy Grundy who loved Hawkwoman, that was kind of him. He really liked Jack and his dad, and they found him beat up, and Jack brought him home, not realizing that he'd killed Sylvester Pemberton.
Oh,
So but his dad never told him. So there was a point where they were also taking care of Michael, the other Starman, who had amnesia at the time, and somebody kidnapped him and just beat the snot out of Grundy, almost killing him. And which is very tough. Um, and when they were waiting to see if everybody was going to be okay, Ted said something about killing Sylvester Pemberton. So then, of course, Grundy ran off, and he was trying to prove himself from the shadows that hey, he was actually a good guy. Um,
aw.
but he ended up, what was his name? Dr. Pip? Something. Little guy who likes to set off explosions. He blew up a hospital, and Grundy saved a bunch of people by holding it up. And then, of
Wow.
course, they found him in the wreckage days later. He was almost dead. And you went inside of him, and they did this whole trip where you found out that he was a lot like Alec Holland, the Swamp Thing, where he's not actually Alec Holland, but there's still the memories inside. Well, the guy who was, I can't remember his name, but the guy who was Grundy is still inside there. But there's also all the million variations of Grundy. So unlike Swamp Thing, where he's always kind of almost always like Alec Holland, every time Grundy dies, he comes back as a different personality.
Oh, that's sad.
And so they lost the sweet, nice Grundy, and he went into being, a monster again, which was just, I was like, thank you. Just, the old Simpsons things where it's like, you won't be needing this anymore. Throw it out.
It's so
Oh, it was
sad.
terrible. It was so sad, but it was so nice to see everything get tied in with all the other mythology of the other, especially a lot of the Vertigo stuff, because I'm a huge Swamp Thing Hellblazer fan.
Yeah.
So basically, the whole thing in the Vertigo was you have the green, the red, and the gray. So it's flora, fauna, mycota. People like Animal Man are the red,
Right.
and then gray would Solomon Grundy is also partially the gray, because that's death and decay and mushrooms, mycota, fungus. There we go. I had to go a lot around to get that word. Fungus. Um, Sorry. Sometimes I
Oh,
just have to follow the chain until I get to the part of the conversation I want.
I hear.
But so you have the Floronic Man Jason Woodrue grew little pods off of his fingers to hook them into his green. So they all had to eat it and then hook themselves in and be part of Solomon Grundy's part of the green to talk to him. And you also got to see his dad be Starman again for a little bit, because of course in the green you can be whatever you want. So he was young and had his power rod, and was very, very neat to see him actually get to be that and not an old man. Pour some more of my sparkly margarita here. Actually, not too bad after about the second one.
Like you said.
Like I said, after a couple of them, won't care. Probably bad that it's carbonated, because it's probably going to my system a lot faster, but
Yeah.
it actually tastes like a margarita. I'm sure that's not actually what's in it, since it comes in a can and it got it from the grocery store, but as long as it tastes right, all that matters.
Tastes good.
Um,
It's alcohol.
yep. So there was a little bit of, kind of like we were talking about, being redeemed. There was a little bit of that in this. You had the Mist had a son and a daughter, and Jack killed his son, which of course sent his daughter around the bend, and she became the Mist and became the bad guy. Um, at the very end, she kind of reversed course, but there was a lot to it. I mean, I haven't reread those episodes. Um,
Same basic idea.
the basic idea. It was a little problematic in the fact that when they had their first fight, one of the nice things I did like about this is that Jack did not go into it like being a great superhero. Like, his dad gave him a cosmic rod, and he's been shot, he's been knocked off of it, he got knocked out so many times, he started joking that he was going to be known as Jack, the superhero who's knocked out and tied up a lot. And it happened a lot. So Nash, who became the Mist, knocked him out and tied him up, and apparently kind of had her way with him because she had his son. So it was a little problem. So that was a little problematic. That goes into that creepy area we were talking about before. I don't really like that aspect of the story, other than at the end when he and his girlfriend and his son, he left being a superhero and they left to go be a family. That was
That's nice.
nice. But how they got there, not really my favorite part of the
It's
story.
not the chick that had her way with him.
No, no, no.
But the
That was
son
a much
was
more,
the baby from that.
yeah. That was Nash, who was the Mist's daughter. His girlfriend is a lady named Sadie, who actually is Will Payton's sister. Will Payton being another Starman.
Interesting.
And originally, she came to town and kind of got to know him because Will Payton was missing somewhere out in space. And she was originally going to be kind of like try to blackmail him or influence his dad or whatever into going to go find her brother. But then it turned out that she met Jack and she liked him and they got to dating. And then she's like, it's really hard to be like, hey, by the way, I came here with kind of nefarious designs to make you, kind of blackmail you to go get my brother. Um, but since he was a nice guy and he loved her, he went to go find him anyway,
Aw.
which was nice. She was very nice. I liked her. She was just other than her brother was Starman, she was just a normal person. Um, Kind of one of the nice things that I like about it was both you had his conversation with Wesley Dodd and Diane Belmont, his wife or
Mhm.
girlfriend. I can't be sure that I don't know that they ever got married. I'm not sure. Um, but they talked about how they had been together for 50 years and so many superheroes. They talked kind of that women in fridges thing. So many
Nice.
people who were superheroes lost a family, friend, girlfriend, significant other to the job and to the enemies, but they'd been together for 50 years and they were very lucky.
Aw.
And that kind of same thing happened with Jack. I mean, his brother was killed and you lost Grundy's personality, but you didn't just randomly kill off people to motivate him other than at the very beginning, David died, but his dad inspired him by being around and finding ways to help him instead of like, oh, my dad died, I have to go do this.
Right.
So,
Which is
other than
usually
that little hiccup,
what happens with superheroes is their parents die,
mm-hmm.
and that's what inspires them, which is tired.
Yeah, in this case, it was my dad was a hero and he did a great job, and I want to live up to him, which was
Yes.
nice. Um, and it kind of talked to that whole, hey, there's the kind of addiction to being a superhero. His dad Ted talked about like with the rest of the Justice Society. They all kind of felt that in the beginning. You had that rush, you really wanted to do it. But other than Wildcat, they all kind of got over it. And at some point, you just wanted to retire and you just wanted to live your life. And it was perfectly okay to do that. It didn't have to be a do it till you die kind of thing.
Which is nice that the Justice Society figured that out.
Yes, yes. Although it was really confusing when you watched or read it. I just want to say watched it an episode. Maybe it's because I want them to put Jack into a movie or a TV show so bad, but we're only ever going to get Courtney.
Maybe not. You never know. I'm
Never know,
surprised.
but I doubt I'll ever get Jack. And I have
Never.
to say that in some ways that's okay because he had a complete story, he had a beginning, he had an ending, which is he got to leave it on a high note, which a lot of characters don't get to do.
True.
I have a feeling if they ever go back, they could always do Michael or they could do Will if they wanted to do a guy. Um, Obviously, they had Sylvester Pemberton die in the Stargirl. Is that the series?
Yeah.
I've been watching it. I haven't watched the last few episodes, but I'm really bad with names. So, um, you probably wouldn't get Sylvester Pemberton, but Will Payton has a lot of open history, and if you really wanted to, I mean, Michael was very quietly one of the first openly gay superheroes. He had a
Right.
boyfriend named Ted who he lived with. There wasn't much said about it. They just showed on paper that they were a couple and they were living together and they were very happy until they weren't. But this was done back in the 90s, so it was pretty early on for them to just be openly gay without all the fanfare like, oh God, North Star's gay. Here's your special episode where he comes out and tells the world. It's like, oh, really?
Give us all the attention and the accolades.
Look, look, we're being inclusive and representational. No, you're not.
Not if you're not writing it well.
Like, you guys fought it for years. North Star was obviously gay for a long time, but you wouldn't let him say it. So I'm not really giving you any props for coming out when you was kind of forced. So it was just an interesting and probably one of my favorite because it does have an ending, and because I did, after about the 500th reboot of all the universes, get out of a lot of comics. Um, I do go back and read certain ones, and I do pick up stuff from here and there, or I watch a lot of the different televised and movies. But
Oh,
hi,
hi.
happy
We have a guest
Halloween!
star. Happy Halloween.
Yes, star. Hi, must you? Apparently, this is Lucky, my Halloween cat.
Yes. Yes, we
Who?
are recording on Halloween, even though this episode will be edited a few weeks later.
Yes, yes, yes. He's getting into the season tonight.
Yes, he is.
he's uh he's actually just a butthead who thinks if I'm talking to other people that I'm not paying the appropriate amount of attention to him.
That's fair.
Yeah, fair enough. Um, and now I completely lost track of what I was saying because you were going to walk on my computer and knock it over.
You were talking about going back and rereading some comics and how this is one that you
Oh,
can't.
yeah, I don't. Yeah, that's probably. Woo, hello. He's done.
Hi,
Um,
Lucky.
Probably why it's one of my favorites because it doesn't really. I don't have to read other things to get a complete story. It's all tied in on one book. Um, and I don't have to worry about, what did they do to my character later?
That is nice.
As a huge Wonder Woman fan, there's been some ups and downs with that story over the years. Where it's like, what is going on? What is
This is
this?
why we drink.
Yeah. I don't really have to worry about that. I'm still a huge Hellblazer fan. I have no idea what's happened with that since the reboots. So if I
I think
read that, I know that it only goes up to a certain point for me because I have no idea what happened other than, from what I've seen, he seems to have become a kinder, nicer John Constantine,
it's
which I'm
weird.
not sure I'm okay with, but what are you going to do?
Not every character needs to be
although,
nice.
although I did like him on Legends of Tomorrow, even though
Me
he
too.
was very toned down, but they did finally find that perfect actor for playing him.
Yes. I love Matt Ryan.
Yes, yes. He can be John Constantine for the rest of his life, as far as I'm concerned, which I'm sure he's like, thanks. But yeah, nope. Anytime he wants to play him, I'm good.
Same. Is there anything else you want to say about the comic?
Um, what was the first one that I really? It also kind of subverted your costume expectations. I don't know if you've ever seen Jack, but he just wears whatever the hell he wants,
I
and
love it.
and a pair of goggles. He has his his first foray out. He wore a jacket with like a zodiac thing on the back because he's like, well, it's kind of close to stars. And then he wore goggles because he was like, I don't know how the hell people who fly do this without wearing goggles because it's cold and it's really windy when you do this.
Yeah,
And then pretty much he just shows up in whatever. And he has like 15 tattoos
that's awesome.
that were just like, they're all, this goes back to his hipster thing. They're all black. And the one that's supposed to be a phoenix on his thigh kind of looks more like a chicken. So
That's amazing. That is
weird, weird character, weird character development 101.
that's the best though. I love
It's very
those weird.
realistic. That just goes back to that everything just feels more like a real person to me.
Yeah.
Because who wants to dress in a big red and green suit with a big cape and fly around the city as a humongous target? Or I could wear my leather jacket and a pair of boots, or in his case, half the time he jumps out of something like I was in bed or I was tied up and that time that he was tied up and taken advantage of, he had to find his clothing along the way. So at one point he's just in his boxers and his cosmic rod, you know, as he's going
His
along and finally
cosmic
finds
rod,
everything
not
else.
Not a
Not
euphemism.
cosmic rod. You had both cosmic rods.
Yes. I love that. I'll have to pull up some pictures to pepper in for flavor.
Yes.
Not
Yeah.
his cosmic rod.
Well, you know the one that he flies with because Courtney uses it, but yeah. Yep,
Well,
just
thank you.
yeah,
Thank you very
that's
much.
really all I can think of for it. So, but
Yeah, that
obviously, if there's other fans, I love to hear about it because I never hear enough about Jack Starman. I just hear Courtney or Ted.
okay. So other fans, drop your comments down here.
There you go.
Or shoot Trish a message. I can't talk either, apparently. That is not supposed to be a tongue twister. My goodness. But drop your comments down here.
There you
So
go.
you can get in touch with
Now,
Trish.
now we're gonna make you say tongue twisters.
Oh, that would be interesting. Sally sells seashells by the seashore. And
Oh, you did
sarcastic.
better than that with my name and messages.
I know. That's
You're doing good. You're doing good with the alliteration. We'll have to stick with that.
I do love alliteration. Alliteration is beautiful.
Yes, it is.
Well, thank you for being on the show. This was very fun. So cheers with my
Yes.
most glass. Cheers.
Cheers.
Clink.